Can I have everybody make their way to a seat? The service is just going to begin in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. I wish it was a happier occasion, but here we are to say farewell to our friend and mentor, Floyd DeWitt. My name is Scott McMillian. Floyd and I go way back. He kind of raised me from a pup, although I was about a 30-year-old pup when he took me in hand. It was about 35 years ago when I first got to know Floyd. And I know that Donna was still in high school, and I still had a full head of hair. I know that because Floyd at that time liked to draw caricatures of me. And I had hair in all those caricatures. And my favorite is an image that he drew of something that he often threatened to actually do, and that was to find a tall enough table where he could hang me off the edge by my nose like a hammer. And I love those drawings, but Floyd loved making them. I can still hear him chortling over them with a glass of whiskey in one hand and a cigarette in the other. And even as late as this summer, when he was having a hard time getting around and keeping things straight, he was still telling nose jokes every time I saw him. I'm sure everybody here knew and admired Floyd's work. It's all around us. I mean, I'm so happy to see some of his youthful work back here. And please take time after we're done speaking to look at all this beautiful work. But what I admired as much as the work as Floyd's work was the effort and concentration that he put into them. These are mostly the serious works, the major ones. But he also had a sense of humor, not just about my nose. When Janie Camp had a show she called a Nocturne at her gallery in Bozeman, she asked artists to create something that evoked darkness or what happens in the dark. And Floyd produced a drawing of a couple locked in a very passionate embrace. And with a straight face, he said, "It's a study of rhythm." And then there's his little bronze of three frumpy prostitutes on a couch. He called that How the West Was Won. And the metaphor that I found in that piece was about what happens to people and cultures when they're willing to peddle themselves, but it was also pretty funny. And Floyd was best known for his remarkable renderings of horses and all their shapes and meanings and symbolism. I think my favorite is of a colt chewing on its hind foot. It's back here. And the title is, it's a perfect title. It's called Innocence. There's also donkeys and mounted riders, and of course, the one of a centaur skipping rope. And the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, over here, yeah. Wow, what a piece. I mean, that was a recurring theme for Floyd, both in bronze and in canvas. And that's an ancient image. It's meant to scare the bejeebers out of people. The symbols of death and pestilence, famine, disease. But Floyd was able to render them almost weightless, to take symbols of terrible trouble and make them float. If you take a close look at that place, it's 4 very slender equine ankles that support this powerful message. But Floyd also had a lifelong fascination with flesh and blood horses, and he often called himself a horse-crazy kid, and I got a good look at that one time when we went up to Wolf Point. The city there had named him Man of the Year. This was sometime around 1990, maybe. And they wanted him to come up to a banquet and accept honors. And Floyd, of course, thought this was all nonsense. But I cajoled and pleaded, and we finally loaded up in my old Cadillac and drove 8 hours across the prairie. But when we got there, Floyd had a ball, mostly because there was a rodeo going on, Wolf Point Stampede, I believe. And I got to see him as he was as a 4-year-old. He'd walk 2 miles from his family home out to the Smith place and just sit on the rail and watch horses all day long. And few things make him happier than watching horses buck, watching men try to ride them. And I don't think he sat down during the entire rodeo. He just got on that top rail and stared at them for hours. And his concentration was so intense that I swear he almost vibrated. And the only time that he would take a break was to eat yet another Catholic burger. And that's a well-known concession in northeastern Montana, and Floyd liked them plain, just meat, salt, and bread. And I think he ate about 6 of them that afternoon. It was something to watch. So being there, it gave me a little bit of insight into his youth. And the burgers were comfort food, but there was sort of mental comfort food too. The horses, the dust, the noise, the riders, the old friends that were there, the memories, both good and bad, of forces that shaped him as a boy and helped him become the man that he became. And I understood my friend a little better after that weekend. But it was 16 hours in the car getting there and back in this swaying old boat of a Cadillac that was kind of hard to keep on a 2-lane road. And Floyd held the floor the whole time. And he talked about the Roman way of training horses. And he talked about how the Assiniboine did it. He talked about Rodin. He talked about Mahler. He talked about bad cops and good cowboys. And mostly he talked about Europe, his years at the academy, the genius he sought there and found there and brought home to share with us. It was exhausting trying to keep up with Floyd mentally. Anybody who spent an afternoon with him was both exhausted and exhilarated. You went home with your life a little different. And over these years, he tried hard to pound as much knowledge as he could into my skull, trying to teach me how to look at the world, to appreciate how light falls, how colors change with distance, how to incorporate metaphor and questions to enhance meaning. And it's not that I was a good student. Sometimes he'd get frustrated and he'd grab me by the head and point my face at something and say, "Don't just look, see." And I tried. Now and then I could see what he could see. But it was frustrating. I mean, Floyd was blunt. He could get under your skin sometimes. But he reminded me of our mutual friend, Urena Clark, who could also get under your skin at times. And here, Floyd, talking of Urena one day, said, "You always had the feeling she was trying to pick your pocket. But once you reach in there to check, you find out she's left a little bit of Chopin in there." And Floyd was very much that way too. But the music was a lot louder. And if he irritated people who loved and admired him, he was tougher on himself, always pushing himself to do better, and that's a hard job. One time in a formal interview, he said to me, "Sometimes it's just a horrible place to be. I'm always competing with myself, and you can't outdo yourself every time." But I'm glad he was too stubborn to ever give up. In the last few years after he and Carla moved to Bozeman, we didn't talk as often. Sometimes we'd go months without a conversation, but then the phone would ring. I'd pick it up. "Well, hello, little Scoopitcha." He had nicknames for almost everybody, usually in Dutch or Latin. And he would have some little question. He usually wanted somebody's phone number, and I'd say, "Okay, Floyd, I'll open the phone book and look it up for you." And I knew that he knew how to use a phone book, but it was just an excuse to call and shoot the bull for a while. And he'd ask about our mutual friends. He'd ask about our mutual friends, and he'd always end the calls the same way, by mangling a line from the poet Robert Frost about forgetting the news of the day. But that only came after he'd caught up on all the news. Thank you.
I'm Tom Murphy from Livingston, Montana, a wildlife photographer. I was more interested initially in Floyd's wildlife, I guess, and I didn't realize there was going to be a bunch of his material here, so I brought one of my favorite sculptures of his. So I'll hold it up when I get a little further down the road. But and I can't tell you who Floyd was. I think maybe that's everybody in this room. He was reflected through our own eyes, but he was a powerful presence. Like said that you experienced Floyd, and it was always a good experience, I felt. I was honored to consider him a friend. We had things in common, I think, that helped draw us together a little bit. Like Floyd, I grew up out in the middle of nowhere on the Northwest Plains. And one of the things I grew up on a cattle ranch, so I don't like cows or horses. Floyd loved horses, which I still find baffling myself. But I think some of the things that I would describe Floyd with this isolation, maybe for me as well as him, can make people really introspective. And I think that's what I see in Floyd. One of his positive traits was his self-reflection, his introspection. And he knew he had something to say, and like Scott mentioned, you're always trying to compete against yourself. You're trying to say it as best you can. And so he created beautiful art with this introspective drive, I guess. And I think Floyd and other creative people that I know really couldn't say where it comes from. And I think that's really cool. Whatever spirit that Floyd was able to project in what you see here and many, many other pieces. I don't think he knew where it came from either. It worked through him. And, and I think that's, if you're writing music or poetry, I think there's a force that moves through people. And, and I think it's fine. I don't think you should fight that. And he, I think, whenever I'd visit him, like Scott too, he wanted you to actually see. And he was always full of questions. And there were questions oftentimes I felt that didn't have answers. And those are the best questions, to have the little doors in your head opened up. You know, they say 90% of an answer is the question. And even if you can't do that last bit. And I feel he was a great artist, truly was. There's a graceful and humble wonderment at truth and beauty. That's kind of how I would like to summarize him. I want to show you this piece that I got from Floyd. I see there's another one at the front desk, but as a wildlife photographer, I have an opportunity to travel a lot, 6 of the 7 continents, and lots of wonderful creatures, wildlife. Bison are one of my favorite animals for lots of reasons. And when I got this home, I set it down, and I just found it beautiful. And the next day I was looking at it, and the head is out of proportion. His head is way too big. His tiny little feet. There's, I see too many sculptors that like to have all the hairs, on, all this stuff. Floyd's fingerprints, blobs of clay stuck in here, streaks of things. And I sent him a letter that next morning, and I said, this little guy's going to stand up and walk away. There's a spirit in this thing.
Thank you, Tom. George Berman? There you are.
It's good to see all of you here. My wife sends her regards to, she knew Floyd as well. And I grew up around sculpture in New York. My mom was a sculptor. And I moved out here following my wife and decided that I needed to try to express some of the things I was experiencing in this country. And sculpture was available, is what I grew up with. So I thought I knew something of it. But that's before I met Floyd. I had seen his work in the foundry, and I didn't know who had done it. As even before I could get close enough to see his anagram. But I was drawn to it like a moth was drawn to a light. Who is this guy? And asking around enough, I heard enough that if you wanted to visit with Floyd, it was a trial by fire. And I'd called around a little bit more before I even dared phone him, because his reputation preceded him. And when we did finally manage to sit down together and have even the briefest of introductory parts of a conversation, he said to me, "You use too many words." Floyd never sugarcoated anything. And I appreciated that. I appreciated that because so much in life we do things, we hand out awards because someone has a pulse, not because they deserve it. And he expected a lot of you if he was going to spend his time with you. And he wanted you to work. More than wanted you to work, he wanted you to labor as he did, as he learned to do. And he phrased it this way, that the first 20 fence posts you pound is work. The next 500 is labor. And so I did my best to labor, and he did not give out compliments because you needed one. He only gave them if you deserved it. And they were very few. But Floyd was one of those people that, despite the prickly exterior, he was one of those people that you couldn't help pivot around and come out the other side different than when you entered and approached. And I left that way. I worked with him a bit on the enlargement of his conductor, and he taught me just how damn beautiful a line and a form and a catch of light can be, and that you do it over and you do it over and you do it over and over again until you find awe in there. And he took great pride in the fact that his mauler he had molded 20 plus times as a testament to his own commitment, like Tom had talked about, of being his own worst critic and going back again and again and again, because not only does the piece change, but you change. And lessons with Floyd were not just lessons of visual art. Listen to this Mahler, listen to this Brahms, read this Dostoevsky, look to the drawings of Citroën or Inge, Rodin, and the others. What do they mean? And those who have had their heads grasped by Floyd, as I have, know that he wants you to see deeper, not only into that work, but yourself. And I appreciated that, because this was from a tradition. It was the Beaux Arts tradition. It was from a man. It was from a heritage predicated on excellence that we so dearly lack these days. Meretricious, he would say. You know what that means? Meretricious. It's done just for money. What a low, low bar to set. Okay, Floyd, I got it. But I don't know if Carla caught me a few times. I knew this day would come. I knew there would be a day without Floyd. That cantankerous son of a bitch. I loved him. I hated him. I went away for years and then had to come back and subject myself to it again, just for good measure. But every time I left that studio in your house, I would feverishly sit in the truck and write notes about everything I could remember that we possibly talked about and looked at and discussed, because I'd never get that day back. We'd never get Floyd back. He asked me at the beginning, are you willing to empty your cup? Are you willing to set aside what you think you know about art, about life, about yourself, to get something better? Are you willing to empty your cup and take something more? And one of his enduring quips that still sticks with me, and there's not a day that goes by in the studio that I do not have his voice sift through the air of that space. He said, the greatest choice you will ever have in life are those and that which you allow to influence you. And I'm very grateful that I was influenced by Floyd. Thanks.
Thanks, George. I was in a sculpture garden in California one time. A lot of the best-known sculptors in the nation were there. And I was talking to one of them, and I said something about Floyd, and then he said, "Wow, you know Floyd DeWitt?" And for the rest of the time I was in that camp, somebody said, "Oh, there's that guy that knows Floyd DeWitt." So I got a little moment of fame out of that. Peter?
Okay, I'll try and get through this one. Hi, my name's Peter Brook. I'm English, as you can probably guess, but I've lived in Los Angeles for a long, long time. And Floyd was a dear friend for over 25 years. And he was one of the most important and influential figures in my life. And I would not be the artist I am today had I not met Floyd. You all know he was a unique individual, and he didn't suffer fools gladly. But boy, he had such tremendous integrity. I've worked with so many people in over 30 years in the film industry, and many of which like to call themselves artists. But honestly, very few people that I've ever met have reached the level of integrity that Floyd has. I don't really have anything profound to say about Floyd, quite frankly. So I just thought I'd share a few stories over the years, some personal anecdotes. I first met Floyd and Carla at a Loveland Sculpture in the Park show in, I don't know, 25, 26 years ago. And I set up I was one of the exhibitors there, as was Floyd, and I set up my booth, and I thought I'd check out the rest of the exhibitors. And of course, I came across Floyd's booth, and the work just was like a beacon of light. It stood out from the rest of the crowd. It was unbelievable. Floyd was sitting in the back. It was probably about 11 o'clock in the morning. He had a margarita and a cigarette. Carla was manning the booth, taking care of business. And I looked at the work, obviously found it amazing, and I just said, "Oh, I just wanted to say, I just love your stuff." Floyd started picking his fingernails. "Stuff? I've got stuff underneath my fingernails, and you call my work stuff?" I went from here to about here, and slunk back to my booth. And that afternoon, he wandered over, and he said, "Floyd DeWitt." And we became firm friends ever since then. We talked sometimes daily, but very often on a weekly basis. I was in LA, he's in Bozeman, and we, like I say, we talked many hours for, weeks and weeks and weeks. Sure, there was a few years where we didn't call each other so often, but one time he called me rather incessantly, and he bugged me to join one of his Scottsdale workshops. I should point out that I'm someone who uses my right hand to draw and what have you. And so he said, "Oh, come on, you've got to go to one of my workshops. You've got to go. You have to come to Scottsdale." I said, "Okay, Floyd, I'll make the time." You have to remember, I'm like I said, I worked in the film industry. So anyway, I took some time off, and I said, I'll come to Scottsdale. So I was looking forward to it. And Monday morning, he did a little show of his work, and this is many years ago, so he was trying to remember exactly what went on. But anyway, on Monday morning, he did a little lecture, and then in the afternoon, we got a model, and we drew from life. By the end of the day, I'd done a reasonably good drawing, if I may say so. And Floyd said, okay, gathered everybody around, and he said, come on, let's have a look at Pete's work. He goes, you see this? Pete knows how to make a drawing look good. I felt pretty good about that. And he said, for the rest of this week, you're going to draw with your left hand. Now, most people would have probably shied away or walked out, but typical Floyd, he just threw the gauntlet down, and I thought, well, okay, I'll draw. And for the rest of that week, I struggled to draw with my left hand because, as Floyd said, you need to find the truth. You can make a drawing look good, but you need to find the truth. So, I mean, I have... He used to call me up, and as Scott said, he always had a nickname for someone, and I'm originally from Yorkshire, so he would always go, hi, the Yorkshireman. And I often think that we shared a sort of a similar personality, well, how can we say, commonality in the fact that I was an Englishman in America, and Floyd for many years is an American in Holland, and he used to say, you know, I'm here in America, I don't feel American, but at the same time I'm not Dutch. And I would say the same thing. I'd say, well, here I am in America, but when I go back to England, I feel like a tourist. And of course, he's used the line, I'm sure, a few times, but he used to quip, well, I guess we're homeless, you know. But he believed in me, and that meant the world to me. He called me a colleague, and he was always there for me. I've got so many fond memories, and he was a wonderful spirit, and I'm so grateful. I feel very lucky that he was in my life. Thank you, Carl and Donna, for inviting me here for this celebration of Floyd. And thank you, Floyd. I love you.
I think we're going to hear from Floyd himself now, on a video, just a few minutes, and so please enjoy.
Many people I've noticed watching my work are reluctant to understand in which category I fit. Does it fit into the Western art? Does it fit into the contemporary art scheme of things? Many people don't know where to put my work. I don't think one should reduce the fine arts or sculpture to merely decorating a wall, a table. I like to think of sculpture as, defining sculpture is the silent language of form. It's a language that is there for the taking. It's a wonderful world of being able to see. Being able to see a thing each time for a brand new time. It's there for the grasping. You have to reach to it. It doesn't come and slap you in the face. It's a wonderful thing to exercise your eyes and your mind with. It shouldn't be decorative. It shouldn't be many things, but it should be one's best effort to contribute to the entirety of mankind somehow. My work is sort of taking the material, designing it very abstractly, and trying to make a monument, to say thank you somehow to something of our human condition. Man, for instance, the symbol of Jacob and the angel. A wonderful symbol, a wonderful thought, a remarkable thing to think about. Jacob struggling with the angel to gain his own identity. And to use a subject like that metaphorically in deciding what piece to make next. Where does one start? Where do you come up with an idea? What makes you come up with an idea? Something from within forces an idea upon you. It superimposes itself onto you. You don't know where it's coming from. You're attacked, as it were. Your thoughts, it's sort of like an injection of something strange. You start seeing things in your sleep. You start sensing them, seeing them all around you. Pegasus, for instance. Pegasus, the romantic Greek symbol of the flight of fantasy, creative mind. The symbol of wonderful creative beauty. The way I see Pegasus is more ominous Pegasus. My thoughts on Pegasus are of a frightened, terrified Pegasus, of a Pegasus ravaged by time, a terrified, raped Pegasus, as it were, one in desperation and terror and fear, and still there, still beautiful, still wonderful, more ominous, more dangerous, fearsome, to be thought about seriously, taken seriously. A creative idea, just because it's creative, is not necessarily the beginning and the end of something wonderful. I've been confronted many, many times by people who are clergymen and researchers, theologists, and people like this. And we've discussed this subject at length, and it's a subject that, the way I work with it, it's hard, if not impossible, to read about it, hear about it, and further the kind of information that I want to express through it. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse is a thing I believe that is in all of us, a macabre side, a side where we see our perhaps ominous past or future. I've worked with this subject for years, and I've never been able to figure out exactly why. I continue to go back to it. It's a very important part of my life, and yet not in a storytelling way. It has to do with Montana. It has to do with my roots in Montana. It has to do with the way we're using our world today, with the way we're misusing our world, let's say. It's a warning. Perhaps it's my own conscience, perhaps it's something within me that's warning me, and that I'm using this subject to warn you or somebody else. I think it's an interesting subject from an abstract point of view. There's wonderful opportunities for design. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful, macabre thought process. It's intimidating. It's not something you'd want to get into and stay with on a continuous basis. I intend to work with this subject matter for the rest of my life. Death is part of life. And I believe the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse is part of us all. At the conclusion of my life, I would wish to be remembered, as I suppose all of us do. Through my work, I would wish to be remembered. I would wish to be remembered as an individual who's done their best for all of us to create wonderful, beautiful images of concepts and of thoughts. To have done my best is what I seek to try to do. Now, I'll have one shot at it.
American sculptor Floyd Tennyson DeWitt is renowned for his classical interpretations of both the human and animal figure. Although he began his journey to critical acclaim as a native Montanan in the dusty High Plains town of Wolf Point, he spent a quarter century in Holland studying Old World methods with European masters who taught him that the impacts of monuments have little to do with their size. For DeWitt, it's all about the power of the gesture and communicating in a visual language that transcends words. DeWitt's work inhabits public spaces in major Dutch cities. He has won top prizes from the National Sculpture Society, the preeminent sculptural organization in the United States. His work is coveted by collectors around the world and is respected by his peers. To understand the magic of Floyd DeWitt's world is to travel through a topography of soothing lines and sensual forms, and a diverse landscape of texture and archetypal subjects that summon thoughts of the ancients. Floyd, one of your favorite artistic philosophers is the Roman Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. What is it about him that resonates with you?
Well, we're diametrically opposites. And he's a great genius, a multi-talented man, he was. I think he still is. And one thing about him that drew me to him in the start, from his onset, was that he was not a person who sought material wealth. He was a man of ideas, and he was a Stoic, and it was his faith, and he believed in the harmony of man. That's what man should be seeking. And his faith and his mind and his brought him to many levels, and he's just a superstar for me. Well, man seeks harmony, and man at the same time seeks it through observing nature. And this is obviously its beginning. Nature's beginning for man is when he's born. And you are born, and we don't know when we can see for the first time. But the first thing you see or you have contact with is you. So your first contact with nature is basically you. And if you study nature long enough, you're inevitably going to find the deity. And it seems pretty obvious to me that if you're seeking nature, if you're seeking to study nature, you're going to find the deity looking at yourself. Does that mean that we are the deity? I think it, begs the question: who the hell are we?
Here we are. You're a very notoriously reclusive man, and you've led us into the sanctity of your studio here, and we're surrounded by a lifetime of work.
So I moved from Holland to the United States about that time, and I had to finish the thing. I'd been working on it about 8 years, and finally they wrote me and said, "Are you ever going to finish this piece?" And so I got really busy with it. I got records of, 6 or 8 different records of Mahler's Titan, and I read a little bit about him, and he was really lauded throughout the world as this great giant of a man. Made the statement once that when he came to the United States, he said, he got off the boat in New York. He was met by the committee that was to meet people over there, and he said, I shall teach you music, which is pretty audacious to teach a crowd of wealthy American financiers. So at any rate, I liked his spirit, but he was a really complicated guy, so I just listened to this music of his over and over and over and over again on a tape, and I just played it over, every day, and to try to make sense of him, to try to get with him, because no photograph of him looked like anything like him at all. My contact with his image was gone. I just never had it. I mean, a picture of him at age 35, three-quarter view, didn't have anything to do with him at another age from the front. The truth of my work is that I work with, like Mahler did, the birth and death and rebirth. And I've been all my life, yes, of the species. Birth, it's truth. And undeniable truth. I mean, we're born or we're not. We're here or we're not, and one form or another. So I work with a pregnant girl, maybe, a sculpture of a pregnant lady, a monument. I'm trying to eulogize the event, that led to your existence and mine, and the existence of those you love, and the same with me. And so it's, and also the death. I work with things that have to do with their demise. I have one sculpture called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, or it's about balance, weightlessness, I call it. Mother of the Ram is a sculpture I've done of a sheep.
The Mother of the Ram is a piece behind you right there.
Yeah, and it's and I was out visiting a rancher friend of mine, and she was a very, very nice little lady, and she had this one ewe come up and stomp his feet and snort and blow, and I said, well, Betty, why is that thing going to act like he's trying to, or she's going to eat us alive? She says, well, she says she thinks you're going to make a threat to her baby. I said, she doesn't have any. And she said, well, she will, and she feels that you're a threat, and sheep don't have any defense mechanism, so she's going to tell you before you ever get the idea that it's not a good idea. So she's bluffing, and so, this is what all mothers do. Bewitching hour, for an example. And the time when you don't know whether or not you should participate in the glorious, or you should hurry up and get ready to get the heck out of there, the not knowing what to do. And I think that's beautiful, that drama. And so I think, for the most part, I try to work with what's beautiful and what's rebirth and birth. And I think that's kind of fun to have achieved it when you make something that is that way.
Beautiful.
We're about done. Joe Wayne just told me that he wanted to say a couple of words. Joe?
I'm glad Floyd had such eloquent speakers here before me so I can be a little quicker. I still have drawings from that weekend too, Peter. Floyd was an amazing individual, and when I say individual, I mean an individual. He was one of a kind. I was 20 and he was in his 50s when we met. Now I'm in my 50s and I still look to him as an example of creativity. He had a childlike ability to have an open mind and curiosity that you don't generally see in people later in life. He would tell me that you have to keep an open mind. You have to keep your mind elastic so it can stretch and you can move around. If you can't do this, it becomes rigid, and before long it will become crystallized. When the mind is crystallized, there is very little creativity, and it was kind of code for us. He would say crystallize, and we both know what he meant. His mind was always on like a gas stove, like the cooker was turned up all the way. It was on full blast, and it was a bright light, and it burnt hot. It was always on, cooking, cooking, cooking. The intensity was inspiring and invigorating and could be draining. Much like it must have been to know somebody like Vincent van Gogh, for example, just always on. And Floyd had a great sense of humor too, as you all probably know. One time we were doing a patina, and I think it was a piece like this, but without the rider, the large horse with the leg up. And there was a few of us standing around, and this guy came in while we were doing the patina, and he said, "Wow, that's beautiful. Who did that?" And there was a new employee, and he didn't know Floyd's name, and so he said, "The old guy." And Floyd instantly reacted to this, but it became a running joke, and when I would call the house, I would ask for the old guy. We had a lot of jokes like this, a lot of running jokes, too many to mention. Floyd would call me up with a quote from someone like Marcus Aurelius, and we would contemplate the mysteries of the universe. We would sit back and look at art books. He introduced me to so many artists of antiquity I would have probably have taken me forever to find on my own. Floyd told me once when he was a kid, he had a big painting he was very proud of hanging in a lobby of an old hotel. He told me some fat cat oil man walked in once, and when he realized Floyd was the artist, he started commenting on what was right and what was wrong with the painting. This enraged Floyd because he didn't know at the time what to say. He hadn't gone to college yet. He didn't have the education, the vocabulary, the understanding that he needed to defend himself against this stuffed shirt that had probably never opened an art book in his entire life. He vowed from that point on that he would never let that happen again. And I doubt he ever did. And it reminds me of something somebody said once. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. So he educated himself well, and it was very inspiring to have him as an influence. That's why it was so hard to see him slip and to see that bright light turn slowly down to just a glimmer. He was a true friend, and very thankful to have known him. And with that, I have a Marcus Aurelius quote that maybe he would like. Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart.
Donna? Okay.
I'm going to read this because I can't talk and stay focused at this point. So thank you, Jody, for letting me your glasses. Might be a little hard to, but it's, yeah, I lost my glasses. So. How to condense how I feel about my dad in 3 minutes. I gotta get through this. These last couple of weeks, I've been... These last couple of weeks, I've been talking with you continually. Each time I hear, "Hey, Spud, how you doing?" I dream about you as though you were here in this world with us, which has been extremely comforting, and here I am talking to you. However, now I will talk to you in third person. When I talk to you now, all I want to do is hug you and my brain shuts off. So I'll be talking about my dad. These last couple of weeks, I've had so many conversations with my dad, things I've wanted to say, questions I wanted to ask, also doubts I have now about feeling unsure about how to express what I feel or think. And yet, as I so often have done, I've returned to how my dad used to encourage me, how he would make me feel that I can do anything. It brings me back to all of the things he taught me and made me feel I could do or learn or get better or excel at. My dad taught me how to jump rope. I used to throw the rope in front of me, run over it, and feel a sense of achievement that I went over the rope until he showed me how to actually jump. Again, I would throw it out in front of me. Now I would jump and felt ecstatic. This must have been it. He laughed. He said, "Good one. Now let's do it again." Finally, I learned how to actually jump rope, and I felt I was on top of the world. He taught me how to fly kite, how to ride a bike, as he held my head in his hand like a basketball to keep me aligned with the road. He just had forgotten how to teach me how to use the brakes. So there we went, heavy traffic, straight through red. Yet I felt successful as everyone around me in traffic was yelling with their angry looks. My dad shouted, "Whoa, whoa, 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 Spud, very good, but now jump off." Of course, he had taught me how to jump earlier, so that worked out just fine. Then writing letters to my grandma. I loved her so much, but each letter was an English lesson. Hours we spent as he went through the words, sentences, the content, encouraged me to talk about what I felt and not just what I did. My mom often told me that my dad had introduced her to the idea of expressing what she felt.
She told me that he would ask her how she felt, and that she didn't know how to respond, yet he inspired her to continue to explore what she felt and put it into words. These are my mother's words, and I recognize them because my dad taught me the same way. She had always been very affectionate and expressive in nonverbal ways, her face, her energy, her body moving, dancing, her singing voice, and so I never felt she wasn't able to express her feelings or love towards me, just to make that clear, as my brother and sisters can also attest to. It was more about the formulation, the organization of thoughts and feelings. I remember my dad making me listen to records of Shakespeare's entire play of Hamlet, around the age of 10, played out by actors while he gave me a book of Shakespeare's Hamlet to read and follow along. Might seem tedious for any English literature class, but he found a way to make it intriguing. Again, so many ways to express oneself. Of course, I can't help but refer to my dad's work in this context, so many ways to express oneself. Not just a feeling, but the intensity behind it in his life. I know my dad was always searching for a sense of enlightenment, a restless soul plagued by an obsessive passion to find the answers and to hold on to the experience of revelation. At the same time, the paradox is you can't catch the sun, much like the story of Icarus. Such dissonance in reaching out and trying to experience the force of life, and at the same time hoping it will lead to some sense of calm and resolution. There's no logical sequence, no justice in it. I'm reminded of the number of times my dad would refer to his experience at a lake where he entered the cold, cold water and started to feel a strong cramp in his legs. He got in deep enough to where he could touch bottom no more and felt himself powerless in the depths of water, unable to move, to swim, to stay afloat. He finally had to give in, surrender to the idea that he lost power and could die as he might drown. At that very moment, he started to feel his muscles relax, to move, and the warmth and flexibility in his legs came back, enabling him to swim to shore. He compared it to some of Alan Watts' examples of how we approach life. This experience impacted him so much as his telling of it impacted me. The struggle of wanting the experience, yet having to surrender, relinquish power, a feeling of sense of loss, yet returning to a discovered sense of life, vivacity, and hope, constantly playing with this tension. To me, it's all visible in his work. I'm getting lost in the intensity and somewhat of a maelstrom of feelings, but it's all so familiar. As anyone knows, getting caught up in strong emotions does not always lead us to make the best decisions. I know that my dad was not exempt from this human experience, like none of us are. I know he lived and loved passionately, sometimes blinding him from reason and decisions based on sensibility. I am also no judge, and I don't wish to be, because the thing most important for me as a daughter, and that I will always carry with me, is the knowledge that both my parents, my father and my mother, loved me unconditionally and with the intensity of a maelstrom. I am who I am because of my father, because of my mother, because of the passion that they shared between the two of them when they were together, even when they were no longer together. The strong emotions, passion, fear, love, anger, regret, and gratefully towards the end of both their lives, kindness toward one another. And this story continues on in me. One of my dad's biggest regrets, as he expressed to me this summer, I actually have a recording of it, is feeling guilty about how he'd split me in two between him and my mother. Why is this important to bring up now? Because he has fervently been seeking the balance, the symmetry, seeking the harmony despite the contrast, the equality between two parts consistently present and visible in his work. Even as I was growing up as a teenager, he would insist on me thinking for myself, encouraging independent thought, yet as a father criticizing when that thought did not fit into his paradigm of what was right for me. The control and then letting go, the liberating then reeling in. The process any parent surely experiences, and any human being in all kinds of contexts of life. Tension is an attempt to seeking balance, like two people tugging at the end of a rope, like a mobile balancing on a pin. You can guess, balance is not a fixed state, nor an ending. It is in continuous motion, in need of both shadow and light, weight and weightlessness. My dad's racing thoughts, searching for peace, answers, always plagued by the tension, and therefore reaching out to points of elevation that exist beyond our social judgments and verdicts. Familiar here, the theme of the apocalypse my dad spent so many years captivated by, so prevalent in his creative process. So although my dad's body now already turned to dust, his legacy, his artwork is most certainly a continuing story that will not turn to dust nor will be covered in dust. And as I assured him on his last day, and one corner of his mouth lifted when I said so, Pop, I will promise that your legacy will live on. In fact, my dad's own words a month ago, on a day when I greeted him in the morning while he was sitting in his chair by the window, I went to give him a big good morning hug. It was one of the last times he was most verbally coherent. I gave him a really big hug, but I could see that he was restless, impatient. He said, "Hey, Spud, you know I love you more than anything in this world." Pointed with his finger. He says, "So now let's get to work, huh?" Pointing at the studio. And I know that's what was on his mind until the very end.
Well, I guess if there's a lesson Floyd left for us, it's to find that path, do better, be better, never give up. That's what he'd want, I think. Carla, did you want?
I can't talk about Floyd, it's too much that he's not here anymore, but I only want to thank all of you to come and to express your thoughts about this remarkable man that I had the honor to live with for such a long, long time. Thank you very much. Where's Shiloh?
If you would like to give your condolences to Carla and Donna, you guys can do that just right on the side here. We're going to flip this place into a reception. So the easiest way to make that happen is if you guys could actually move to the side. So it's perfect timing anyways to give your condolences. Anybody that would like to help, we're just going to stack chairs and bring tables in. So thank you guys for being here today, and give us about 10 minutes and hopefully we can have all the food all ready to go. Alrighty, the food is all ready, and we do have tables and chairs in the back too if you guys want to help yourself. So whoever wants to be the first one through the line, go ahead.
that look familiar?
Yeah, it looks very familiar.
We have the little one of it. Yeah. That guy's running letters. All the other